Hello, and thank you for joining us at SafetyTech 2021. My name is Charlotte Willner. This is the Safety by Design breakout panel. So if that's the one you meant to come to, you're in the right place. This panel is about safety by design. Every design decision a product team makes can have an impact on the safety and well-being of the people ultimately using those products. As Executive Director of the Trust and Safety Professional Association, I know those decisions also have an impact on the people moderating those products too. Today, we've invited 3 panelists to discuss various approaches to safety by design and how products, brands, and creators can ensure that their process is fair and is inclusive. First, I'd like to introduce Tracy Breeden, who is VP of Trust and Safety at Match Group. And I think she's going to join us here soon. There we are. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Charlotte.
And then I'd like to introduce Azmina Dhrodia. She's Senior Policy Manager at the World Wide Web Foundation. Hi, Azmina.
Hi.
And then finally, Richard Pursey, who is CEO of SafeToNet.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Richard. Thank you all for being here today, various time zones. So thank you especially for that. I'd like to start off by just asking you each to tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and share some perspective on how you think about safety by design. And then after your remarks, I'd like to guide us through a few questions that I certainly have, and then open the session up to audience questions. So sound good?
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Tracy, could you lead us off? Sort of, who are you? Why are you here? And what does safety by design mean to you?
You got it. Well, my name is Tracy Breeden. And lead, of course, safety, trust and safety at Match Group. And that involves also overseeing not just trust and safety and social advocacy for Match Group, but also trust and safety across our portfolio of dating apps. Recently joined Match Group about 6 months ago, and previously I served as Uber's head of women's safety and gender-based violence programs for 4.5 years. And then before that, I was a former police officer and investigator for over 15 years. And my subject matter expertise really lies in sexual assault, domestic violence, and safety of groups that face marginalization. I've worked with over hundreds of safety groups and advocacy organizations and helped create safety products, safety strategy across 6 continents. You know, when we talk about safety design and how I feel about it, one, it's first and foremost a priority. I think I can really speak to some of the approaches and frameworks that really help organizations weave safety culture and design into the fabric of their organization. And ultimately that creates safer products and safer communities overall for all of us. But it's certainly a priority. I certainly do not believe that any organization can up-level what they're doing around safety without a safety design approach and framework in place. And happy to discuss some of the tips and thoughts I have around the best approaches and framework that work for that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next up, we have Azmina Dhrodia. Azmina, could you talk to us a little bit about what safety by design means to you and the work you've been up to in this space?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. So I've been working on the issue of women's safety over the past few years, both through civil society organizations, but also from the perspective of working at a tech startup that was designing safety tools. So my work and my background has really been around understanding how women experience gender-based violence and online abuse in online spaces. And I started working on this issue about 5 years ago when I was at Amnesty International, focusing on women's experiences of abuse on social media platforms in particular. And what became very clear very quickly to me is that in these online spaces, you know, despite being an incredible place for people to sort of connect and share information and network and participate in communities, there are also places where women can experience a vast amount of hate and threats against them simply because of their gender and who they are. And for us and for me, when talking about the issue of safety online and women's safety online, it's really important to acknowledge that, women of color and Black women in particular, and other marginalized groups are really at the forefront of experiencing online harms. And then after Amnesty, I actually joined a small tech startup where we were building tools to help people filter out unwanted and harassing content on their social media feeds. So it was really interesting putting some of that research into practice in terms of actually designing tools to improve people's safety. And then right now I'm at the Web Foundation, and we are doing some really exciting work where we're tackling the issue of online abuse against women, but using human-centered design thinking, and really centering women's experiences in the co-creation of solutions to this problem. So, for those of you that don't know, the Web Foundation was co-founded in 2009 by Tim Berners-Lee and Rosemary Leith. Tim Berners-Lee, as many of you will know, is the inventor of the World Wide Web, and he and the organization are incredibly committed to ensuring that we have a web that works for everyone and that's a safe and empowering space. So I think when it comes to safety and design, I think what's really unique about the approach that we're taking is that it's truly multi-stakeholder. So, we have started off with a series of consultations looking at online gender-based violence, talking to different groups working on the issue, focusing on specific women that are disproportionately impacted, and really bringing together, the TikTok, Google, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the world's largest social media platforms, but also other civil society organizations and experts working on this issue. And then in this next stage of the work, we're going to be using those insights and that evidence to develop a series of design workshops where we unpack this evidence and we co-create solutions with those that are most impacted, but also with the tech companies, so we can create something tangible and design something that can work for everybody, but that's also realistic when it comes to limitations on tech stack or tech architecture.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then I've gotten notes from our fantastic facilitator here for people just coming in. What is this session before we move to Richard? So this is the Safety by Design breakout session. We have Tracy Breeden, Azmina, Dhrodia, and Richard Pursey with us to talk about issues of safety by design. And we've just been going around sort of talking through who are these folks and what is their interest in this field. Richard, we're going to move to you. Talk to us about the work that you've been doing around safety by design. Sort of what is it that's brought you here?
Thank you, Charlotte, and hi, everyone. I mean, it's such an honor to be part of what is effectively the world's first conference dedicated to SafetyTech. We must thank and applaud the work that DCMS has done to bring this conference together, and I think it marks a pivotal moment, actually, in what is an incredibly exciting time in the safety tech industry. I started SafeToNet with my wife about 7 years ago. Feels like 100 years ago, I must tell you. And it was when online harms was really seen as a social problem that couldn't be fixed by technology. And it was simply something you had to put up with if you wanted to socialize and interact online. It just came with the territory. But I think all of that is changing as there's some stunning technology emerging to tackle the thorny issues such as sexual predation, bullying, graphic violence, and more. So hopefully this conference will lead us and take us to the point where it won't be long before online harms becomes a thing of the past and we sort of collectively scratch our heads remembering how life used to be without SafetyTech. So we started SafeToNet some 7 years ago, and we're tackling the issue of online predation of children. And we're talking about bullying, abuse, aggression, sextortion, those sorts of things. UNICEF will tell you there's over 750 million children online at any one time. And of course, they're sort of all vulnerable. They're naive, they're easy to trick. And so we embarked on this and developed artificial intelligence to be able to contextualize what a child is doing on their device, their phone or their tablet. And then to run our technology on the device using the processing power of the phone to filter harmful content before any damage is done. So from my perspective, I'm here really to talk about safety technology in itself. By default, that's what I do for a living. And as far as I'm concerned, integrating safety tech into a company's products is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. I mean, without it, you're exposing your users to horrific harm that will affect them for the rest of their lives. Now, we know that legislation will, of course, help you drive your safety by design approach, but hopefully your motivation will be deeper than that. Being safe is a fundamental human right that we should all protect, cherish, and champion. But SafetyTech isn't just about minimizing risk. It can also boost your corporate value and give you competitive edge. I know that for a fact. The SafetyTech industry is booming, especially here in the UK. And if you adopt a safety by design approach, you will gain competitive advantage. Of that, there's no doubt in my mind, and you'll increase barriers to entry too. It's a fast emerging industry that's attracting investors from around the world, and they increasingly see it as a mandatory requirement in any tech stack. So from my perspective, I've got a few sort of battle scars when it comes to developing safety tech. We see ourselves as pioneers to an extent. And my strong advice is that you add safety to your company messaging, be proud of it, brag about it, emphasize it, but moreover, ensure that you deliver it. And so if you're thinking of building your own safety tech stack, then there's some lessons to learn and some obstacles to navigate. The good news is that others have gone before you and are happy to share their learnings, because this is a collaborative requirement. No single company or organization can tackle online harms on their own. So whilst preparing for today, I sort of reflected on some of the mountains that SafeToNet has had to climb to get to where it is today. We're now safeguarding children in over 110 countries around the world. And I guess there's sort of three lessons that I wanted to share with you. If you're responsible for safety by design in your product set. So firstly, ensure you link safety by design with privacy by design. The two go hand in hand, and especially if your product is to be used by children, as SafeToNet says. So ensure you understand the fine detail of privacy directives such as GDPR, fine detail I'm talking about here. In particular, check out your obligations where they relate to special category data, such as sexual content, religious and political content. Secondly, continually assess the efficacy of your algorithms. You'll be measured on this. If you're in the field of AI, ensure you understand automated decision-making, ADM. It's a key element of GDPR, and you'll need to master that from the outset. And finally, be alert to the ever-changing legislative landscape. In the UK in particular, look out for traps within the Investigatory Powers Act, the Computer Misuse Act and the Defamation Act. They all play a part in your approach to safety tech. So I know that might all sound a little bit daunting, but don't be put off. At the very least, you can learn from others and even adopt their technology. For help, I'd guide you to the Online Safety Tech Industry Association, OSTIA. It's got over 100 brilliant, fast-growing safety tech companies who can help you with your approach and design and build process. The technology you are looking for is almost certainly already out there, from real-time on-device messaging video filters through to cloud-based solutions that detect threats from disinformation through to radicalization and more. So finally, push ahead with confidence and vigor. It's so important, safety tech. Safeguard your users. The rewards are huge, and not least the wonderful feeling you get when you safeguard a fellow human being from harm. It's such a powerful motivator. So thank you, and I'll welcome this discussion.
Thank you, Richard. And for those of you just joining us, this is the Safety by Design panel. We are talking about the design decisions that a product makes or a product team makes, and the way that those decisions then impact the outcome on people, your end users, and your moderators as well. We have three folks with us today who all work in safety by design in various ways, and so this is the point of the panel where I'd like to ask some of the questions that I have. Richard, you had mentioned, it's very important. It's sort of non-negotiable at this point for products to have, safety. Yes, we really believe in safety. It's very important. And I think it's fair to say that overall, very few founders, very few designers go out there and say, I'm here to make an unsafe product today, right? Like in general, that's something that many folks agree, we want things to be safe. But I'm sure in our careers, we can all point to times where, inadvertently, some design decisions were made that ended up with perhaps unexpected consequences when it came to the safety of the users or the moderators. I'm wondering if any of you have some examples you can share of, in your time in the field, either a decision that you or your team or your company made that actually, sort of accidentally ended up being an unsafe one, or vice versa, perhaps on the silver lining side, something that you put in place that you didn't realize was going to have the positive impact that it did. And just illustrating for our audience just how even the smallest of decisions can really end up having big real world consequences.
Well, I could certainly begin there. I've got battle scars, as I said. I could sadly probably talk for about 5 days on all the mistakes that we made along the way. I'll never forget our CFO and I, we were called into a meeting with our lawyers, and we've got some pretty heavyweight lawyers in London. And we told them about how our technology worked. And one of the things we were doing is we were intercepting incoming messages without the authority of the person that had sent it in the first place. We were doing it for good. It's social impact. We were doing it to safeguard children, until, of course, the lawyers said to Ted and I, you realize you could go to prison for doing that. And so what seemed a pretty obvious thing to do, why wouldn't you be allowed to do that? It just put the fear of God in me. There were 5 of these lawyers. The suits walked in, they had the watches, they had the shoes and everything else. And I don't think I've ever broken out in such a sweat in my whole life. So we realized that this is a complex landscape. And legislation is different depending where you are around the world, and you really need to be alert to that.
Charlotte, I'd like to add to that as well and talk a little bit about, I think, one of the things I think also just kind of taking a step back as product teams or designers, we're thinking about what recommendations we give, what kind of, missteps have happened or what's been done right. I think the most important thing is organizations need experts when it comes to safety in those buildings working. There are very few companies that have head of safeties teams. Even the people who are running safety teams have no safety expertise. And so they go forward with design without having that expertise, whether it's internal and also bringing those experts in. And I'm not talking about just donating money and having partnerships, in quotes. I'm talking about having strategic partnerships and bringing those groups in to help. The organizations that are doing it right have those people in place walking along that journey with you when you're also creating safety products. To give you an example of, one of the things that with the past organization I was with is they were moving forward with an ID verification process, not thinking about how that may impact the transgender community and how difficult it is for them to have an ID that is reflective of the gender that they are choosing, and how difficult a user experience that would create for them, and not thinking through that process. However, if you have somebody who has that expertise on your team, who brings that inclusion expertise already, you're less likely to make that misstep as you're going along or you're working with an organization. And taking a step back, you need an assessment that's done. Organizations need to have a safety by design assessment completed so you know where you're starting from and where you're going. One of the government organizations that has a great assessment tool out there is the E-Safety Commission in Australia. So government organizations, there's a lot of advocates out there. There are people that have been working in this space, like myself, who have done many assessments and understand the steps that an organization should take in order to assess how are your product teams designed to begin with? Is your infrastructure set up to be a detriment to safety? product design, or is it set up to actually elevate and help you achieve those consequences that you want, which is a safer community? So those are things I think that are important. I think just an example of how, something can really work out in a positive way. And I think Tinder has a great example of this when they just started designing some of their AI and machine learning models around keywords. When it was first designed to try to capture harassment, it was set up in a way where it was capturing words and phrases that were not harassment, because they did little things like not putting spaces either at the side or the front of a keyword to capture things. So it would capture things and create a poor user experience. But they were able to fix that, and then also up-leveled what they were doing to create some technology called Does This Bother You? To capture harassment preventively and ask this person if they felt it was harassment, encouraging them to report. Because the other thing we know is that things are underreported. Women are not coming forward and reporting. Why? Because they have the way they're treated and responded to. So what are we doing proactively to encourage people to report, to encourage people to recognize harassment? So I think that's a positive example of how they stepped into that space, not really thinking, not really knowing how positive it would be, and have had a tremendous positive response from it. So a little bit about structure, assessment, certainly a real life example for you, but I think it's important for organizations to understand they need to do a proper assessment, and they need to be structured and set up in a way that will not be a detriment to safety product design.
I can jump in as well quickly. So yeah, I would think it's a really great question. And what was really interesting when I joined a tech startup, and in terms of what Tracy was saying about bringing experts in, I'd always worked on the issue of women's safety from a policy side and from a sort of advocacy side of things. But since I was brought in to head up the user research, and it was a really, really small team, I was working very closely with the product designers and the engineers. And because I had just completed a bunch of research on the issue of online abuse against women, and we had done some fantastic some studies with some AI companies to look at trends of online abuse. We found that Black women politicians and journalists in the UK and the US were 84% more likely to receive online abuse than white women, for example. So as the person that was in charge of user research, I was well equipped with the knowledge to know that if we wanted to actually design tools to keep people safe, that I needed to speak to the groups that were most marginalized and who were disproportionately at risk of experiencing online harms. And it really felt that because I was leading that research and talking to the right folks, that they were also helping to truly design what the product looked like. And I think the really interesting part as well was that because we were building a tool for safety tools and safety filters for an app that already existed, and on top of an existing app, you could see how clearly the safety features that we were developing hadn't either been considered or prioritized, or perhaps wasn't compatible with the tech stack. But all of a sudden, we were building tools that really got to the heart and the needs of the users that were disproportionately impacted. And obviously, that was because we had that expertise in-house to identify that. So I think in terms of ensuring that you have the right people in the room when making those design decisions, it's really, really important. And I think, I was talking about the design workshops that we're doing at the Web Foundation, and these workshops that we're holding will be the pilot for something called the Web Foundation's Tech Policy Design Labs. And that's where we're really bringing this multi-stakeholder approach, where you bring together the companies, the civil society experts, the independent experts and researchers, and the users themselves to tackle these tricky product and policy solutions. I think it's important to recognize that not every tech company will be able to always bring in this expertise in-house, but there's lots of other folks in this wider ecosystem that have this expertise and that are willing to work together to achieve those solutions. So yeah, I think that's really important to consider as well.
That's great. And that actually brings me straight to my next question. I think we have time for one more of my questions before we move to the audience questions. As you just mentioned, and Tracy, as you were sort of talking about earlier, one of the best ways to ensure that you have an inclusive product is to include people in the way that you build your product. And that sounds, of course, that's another one where I think people think, well, yeah, you know, I want to include people, sure. But I think we see time and again across all types of products, like that is not something that happens, even though people think they've taken the steps to make that happen. You know, to the panel, what are your specific recommendations for folks coming to this panel on like self-checking that? How are you actually getting accountability on making sure you have gone through a process where you are considering diversity, you are considering inclusion, you're considering fairness, and baking that into your entire process? What are those self-check mechanisms you'd like to see?
Yeah, I think you hit on it, Charlotte. I say that, if you're really going to prioritize safety, you need to prioritize women, people of color, and marginalized communities first and foremost, because they're disproportionately impacted by safety. When you prioritize those groups, you're going to create safety for everyone. It's just going to be an automatic. And yes, you say, how do you hold people accountable? How do you have that checklist? Well, one, you need that, organizations have to have somebody, whether it's a member of the DE&I team or it's a member of the safety team, you have to have somebody internal who has that expertise, who can create those design and weave those kind of checklists into those design frameworks. Somebody who you're setting up times where they're reviewing that product design as you're going forward, because they're going to have that inclusive lens that other people are not going to have when they're looking at that. So creating a standard and a policy and weaving that into it, not just a checklist, but having an individual or person who is a part of that process. And do they need to be there day in and day out while the product design? No, but they probably need to see the proposal of the product design and bring them in on that journey as you're taking it. People should also think about, I can't afford to go hire somebody. Well, you have ERG groups. You look to the groups that have the expertise to create a working product group. To be a part of that process. I've done that in the past as well before I was able to bring get approval for a head count, to have somebody with that expertise in our building all the time. Was to create those working groups with that expertise. It may be even an external organization to help bring that external organization to help create what that assessment tool would look like, or how you, in your safety by design product assessment tool, how you weave that inclusion into that, and they can help design that for you.
I can add to that as well from a technical perspective, and ensuring that you don't introduce bias into your AI algorithms, which is pretty tricky when you think about it. And of course, it depends on your aspirations and whether you are trading nationally or internationally, globally. But the approach that we took in safeguarding children was to involve children from the outset, and from a really diverse range of backgrounds and cultural and ethnic beliefs and positions and so on, as well as introducing international children to the whole sort of feature set design. But also crucially in AI, when you are in the field of data labeling, we give our labelers and our classifiers the freedom to interpret data in the way that they would naturally interpret it, rather than guiding them and specifically and telling them how to annotate data and to label it and so on. And so you have to allow huge freedom in your construction of SafetyTech to ensure that those biases don't exist. We've engaged with well in excess now of 2,000 children of different ages and backgrounds, and I've said, and it's utterly fascinating the insights that you get just as human beings sitting on the periphery watching some of the discussions play out, and to ensure that you do get that diversity and that lack of balance. So it is all about involving as many people as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and I think when I talk about when I think about diversity and inclusion and safety by design, I always like to take a step back first, and I just think it's so important that when we're talking and thinking about safety by design, that we acknowledge and remember that like all of these forms of discrimination or violence or abuse that are experienced by specific group in online spaces, it isn't new, right? It's a continuum of what these people face offline, and it's just manifesting in a new space, and just like we think about like diversity and inclusion and our physical and offline interactions, we need to think about how these issues play out online. They don't just, my skin color and my gender doesn't just disappear when I open up an app on my phone. We all have different identities, and we know that, but all of these different identities mean that we have different experiences, and therefore we may have different needs. And I think sometimes what can be missing or perhaps isn't given enough attention to is this explicit consideration of how these different identities, whether it's your gender or your race or your sexuality or the combination of all of those, or any protected characteristic, really can play a part in the user experience or in the user journey. And then also that these experiences of inequality that are faced offline, they don't just manifest online. They can be exacerbated, right? They can be amplified online, just because of the way online spaces are, depending on the space that we're talking about. So I think like that really leads to what I was talking about in my last answer about the using the research, and then sort of using that to arm yourself with what are the considerations that you need to think of when introducing a new product feature, updating a new policy, because if we don't consider these experiences, the consequences are very, very harmful, right? We're seeing, for example, droves of women leaving online spaces because they either experience abuse for speaking out, or they see someone else that looks like them, or that experiences abuse for speaking out. So, it has a really huge impact on whose voices we hear, whose stories we share, has a huge impact on your user base. And I think it also has a really big impact on whether or not your company is seen as a safe place for certain groups of people, right? And that's something that we need to think about as well. And I think one thing that we're doing at the Web Foundation is we're actually pushing beyond safety by design and thinking about gender by design, because I think it's so important for designers not only to think through the safety questions, but to think through all of their considerations and questions around every stage of the process on how their decision can impact the most marginalized groups, including women and women with multiple intersecting identities, and how are they addressing and mitigating against these potential harms, and do their decisions, are they evidence-based, and are they consultative in their nature, and ideally that would embed safety by design principles, but take it a step further as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I am now going to turn to audience questions, and we are getting a lot of them. So I'm going to do my best to synthesize a lot of the related ones. The first one I'll put to the panel is a general question around balancing safety and privacy. One of the first questions we got was, all right, there are these products that have end-to-end encryption, and that's really great from a privacy perspective, but you might miss a lot of abuse that way. And there are, a few others, just in general, acknowledging that there is this tension between like a lot of privacy perhaps and a lot of safety. So the question I would put to the group is, well, is there a tension there? And how do you navigate that apparent tension? What are some solutions that particularly smaller companies, younger companies can be thinking about when they approach those questions?
So, Charlotte, there's a huge tension there certainly in our sphere of safeguarding children. It's balancing the absolute fundamental rights that a child has to privacy to a parent's primal desire to keep their children safe online. That's pretty tricky. Mm-hmm. If you tell a parent that their child is being bullied, the natural question they're going to ask is, well, who's bullying him or her? And if you're not careful, and if you haven't actually educated and guided and advise the parent on how to deal with the information that you give with them, then the parent themselves can actually make it worse. And classically, what has happened in sort of the history of parental controls technology is that parents who've misunderstood maybe the information that they've seen, because it's very difficult to understand what a child is doing online. Parents typically don't know who they're talking to, what they're saying, what they're hearing, and so on. Parents have a habit of wading in and actually causing bigger problems, especially, for example, when they take the phone away from their child, which is these days the modern version of grounding your child is you don't send them to their room, you actually take their phone off them. The problem with that is that you've intruded on your child's life. Mm-hmm. And of course, children these days, their real life actually is spent online. It isn't actually cuddling with mum and dad on the sofa on a Saturday night watching telly. And if you were to take the average teenager's phone off them and try and make head nor tail of what's going on their device, you won't be able to work it out, because they have multiple simultaneous discussions on multiple apps all at the same time. They use tribal language and so on. But it is so crucial that we've learned in the safeguarding landscape to defend the child's rights to privacy. It's so important to do that, because if you don't, you can drive them underground. We found a balance in the way our technology works, in that we never let mum or dad see what the child is actually saying or what they're messaging or the imagery that they're looking at. But instead, we guide them with what we call a safety indicator that tells them of their child's proximity to risk without actually telling them exactly what's going on. And we do feel that part of this whole privacy safety landscape is to educate mums and dads as much as it is to keep children safe online. It's a crucial part of the safeguarding landscape.
Yeah, thank you. If there are any other comments on safety and privacy, we can cover those. Otherwise, we got more questions. So I don't want to cut anybody off, but we've also got loads of audience questions. All right, let's keep moving. One very insightful question here, I think, and one very close to my heart, which is examples of metrics we use when evaluating success. So this person says, how do you build metrics when you don't know what safety incidents you've missed necessarily? And I know often in trust and safety, we talk about, well, if we do a good job, nobody knows and nobody cares. And you make one mistake and everybody cares, right? So what are some examples in your experiences of metrics that have really worked from both perhaps a business perspective and a user safety perspective on, are we actually making an impact here? Are we actually making this a safer space?
I think that's a great question. I think it's also one of the most difficult things to do is to identify what those metrics are for safety. And, online, we can see a lot of things like bots and how easy that is to create metrics around, but how much, think about how difficult it is for not only online behavior, but to create metrics around anything that may happen offline that may be connected to a platform. So it can be very difficult. One of the things I want people to see too is when you create metrics, first of all, you have to have good data. You have to understand what's happening on the platform. What are we seeing? What are the trends around what we're seeing, not just with the product, but with the actual problems that are surfacing or may not be surfacing. We also have to go out external. Not only what are we seeing on our platform, but what are people in the community seeing? What are experts seeing? What is law enforcement seeing? What are women's groups? What are, social justice organizations seeing? What are the trends that are arising in our communities so that we can really understand the problem? You can't until you have clean data, until you set up a system of defining safety, of defining those categories of harm, and actually starting to track those and understand those, then it's very difficult to set any type of metrics. And if you have a product such as a safety center or something like that, setting up metrics around usage alone is not going to tell you a lot. It might tell you if you have low usage that you're not communicating or educating enough in that space. So for people to see success, and I also say, yes, you want to see overall, you want to be reducing incidents at the end of the day, or you may see high numbers just because you're doing the right thing. So you see high numbers of reports because people feel comfortable in reporting because they know you're taking action. So looking at the context around that, I tend to say you need to have incident metrics, but you also need to have sentiment metrics because it's just as important for people to feel safe as it is those actual reduction of incidents. People want to know that they're welcome, that they can come into this space and they can feel safe. So designing metrics around sentiment are just as equally as important as designing metrics around incident reduction. But you can't do any of that until you have good, clean data and until you actually know what's happening and you're tracking what's happening on your platform.
I really think, Tracy, you covered it so well. So I don't have too much more to add, but I just want to sort of echo everything that you said. And I think also the transparency around that data and having it publicly is really, really important, especially for, you know, civil society organization or other groups that are trying to help build solutions. Because so many times it's frustrating when you don't actually know exactly what's happening, and therefore your policy recommendations are to release data versus actually you know, trying to suggest something concrete. So, you know, an example that I like to think of is if, let's say, you know, if you're experiencing abuse on a platform and reporting is basically the recourse that you have from the company to, you know, get some type of justice out of the fact that you've experienced abuse. If you're reporting abuse and the company is letting us, you know widely as their users, you know, the incidence of abuse that's being reported, and then that's disaggregated by the type of abuse. So let's say it's identity-based abuse, and then not only the type of abuse that's reported, but the outcome, right? Because if there's a high level of people reporting identity-based abuse, and then that abuse coming back as saying it's not a violation of the community terms and standards, either one of two things I think is happening. One is that your users don't actually understand the policy of what you're saying is identity-based abuse, so you need to do more education around that, or your content moderators aren't being fully informed about what you mean. But it's so difficult to come up with something concrete when we don't have those stats and that data. So I think it's really important to have good metrics, to make those transparent, to make those public and open, but to also be disaggregated as possible when it comes to you know, what you're releasing and how you're doing your analysis, because then that can allow for far more like helpful and granular solutions, I think.
Well, you just uncovered my personal soapbox, which is, if you are here and you are a young company, you're working at a smaller company and you're thinking, what can I do? What's a step I can take to make things safe? Oh, be thinking about your data. Be thinking about your data structures, what you log, what you don't. Of course, you know, just there are implications to logging everything, right? But the more data you have, the easier it is going to be for you in general to figure out what's going on and to inform the public what's going on. We're seeing a huge movement towards increasing transparency from tech companies. And I think that is a really, really good thing. And also a really, really hard thing for a lot of companies who, when they're just starting and trying to just keep the site up, they're not thinking about, oh, and here's how specifically I architect all of my data to make sure it's easy to pull if we ever need to look at it, right? No one's thinking like that, but you could be the person thinking of that by attending this panel, because all of that just makes it a lot easier to figure out what's happening and being able to keep people informed about what's happening.
Charlotte, can I just add to this, because I think it's such an important aspect to the whole safety tech and safeguarding landscape, because you must measure impact. If you don't measure impact, how can you possibly improve? And you know, many safety tech companies are deploying artificial intelligence, and so it's the automation of content filtering, crucially in real time as well. And again, it links to my opening remarks about GDPR and understanding the more granular details behind GDPR. Because if you've written and deployed safety technology that automatically filters harmful content, or is designed to automatically filter content, you have a duty to understand whether it's doing it properly or not. It goes back to the whole point about bias and diversity and all those sorts of issues. And so you have to enter into this world of what's called automated decision making. Your technology has to give the user the opportunity to object to what your technology has just done. And that in itself opens up a really fascinating sort of psychological sort of issue, because children in particular have a habit of complaining about anything and everything if they think it's impinging on their rights to freedom and privacy and all the rest of it.
So that's not just children, that's people, I believe.
well, too right. I would definitely be one of those. There's no doubts about that. But it is so important that you measure impact. So our technology detects threats, and so goes into overdrive when it sees a threat, and it will filter that threat. In particular, it does it in real time, and we record that event. We don't know, no human being sees what the child was doing. It's technology here, but there's a mark that says, this technology has just intervened and it's done something and it's had an impact. And so, I mean, I think it's important to also recognize in today's world that, you know what, profit and purpose can coexist. That's no bad thing. And so you will find ultimately, if you run a brilliant safety tech business, you will ultimately generate profits. And that's a sign, profits are a byproduct of brilliant safeguarding. So there's different ways of measuring it, but you can absolutely measure the impact of your technology, and you have to do it. Otherwise, how can you possibly improve and therefore safeguard your users even more effectively?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have just 5 minutes left here, and so I wanted to close by just this is like the lightning round. For folks wondering, coming here and saying like, well, how can I learn more about this? Like, I want to go out and like read some more, listen some more. I'll just ask: is there any sort of one resource or set of resources you might point people to, whether that's an article you read recently or a book that you know about or a great podcast or a great YouTube video? I can go first, and it's just that I mentioned I am executive director of the Trust and Safety Professional Association. We have a sibling organization called the Trust and Safety Foundation Project, and on the website there, it's tsf.foundation. Oh man, now I'm getting on the spot here. We have case studies. You can actually go to our CogX booth and see a link to those case studies. And that's a way that people can kind of put themselves in the shoes of folks in tech making decisions and understand, okay, what considerations are at play? What do people need to think about when it comes to trade-offs, et cetera? And that can be really helpful when you're thinking through questions of safety by design. Anything else?
Yeah, I would say visit the SafeToNet Foundation. And the SafeToNet Foundation runs regular podcasts on this whole topic, and they're cerebrally absolutely fascinating. Interviews with the real great and the good when it comes to tackling online harms and so on. And so there's some fantastic content there, but also approach OSTIA, the Online Safety Tech Industry Association. There's tons of people in there that are just driven to keep children and people in general safe online, and you'll find a wealth of resource and expertise.
Right.
And I would just echo, Charlotte, your recommendations, because I think you have valuable resources. And it's about, corporations not working in silos. It's about working together as industries, because there's so much learning out there. So organizations like yours that are bringing industries together are so valuable. And then I would just, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, I think, the E-Safety Commission in Australia is very innovative in what they're doing and providing some really great information and assessment tools for organizations out there. So if you just Google them, you'll be able to find those tools as well.
So, the Web Foundation, we're still at the, I wouldn't say at the start, but our journey is just kicking off in earnest in terms of our work on this issue and using human-centered design thinking and design principles. At the moment on our website, we have a series of blogs that have the key takeaways from our consultations on online abuse. So you can find out a little bit more about the trends and the patterns of how online abuse affects different groups. But as we kick off these policy design workshops, which will be happening in the next few weeks, we'll be releasing a report and findings from these workshops. And the whole point of these workshops is for companies to come together actually and to commit to testing and implementing some of the solutions that we've co-created at the UN Generation Equality Forum, which celebrates the 25th anniversary of the Women's Rights Declaration. So all of these materials will be on the website, and hopefully some of the gender by design principles and some of the tools that we'll be co-creating will also be up there as well. So there'll be some tools that can be used and shared widely so that other folks can see how to do this work in a multi-stakeholder way that centers the experiences of those that are most marginalized in these spaces online.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all panelists so much for spending your time with us here today. So that's Tracy and Azmina and Richard. Thank you. And thank you everybody who tuned in to check this panel out. So we hope you will enjoy the rest of your time here at SafetyTech. We're going to turn you back over to the main stage. So please join us back there. I think you're going to have a couple minutes, take your bio break, and we'll see you there. Thank you again.